Hi, my name is Ann Arroyo, and I will be presenting Samuel Finley Breese Morse. 4. Art 503, Foundations of Art Education. Assignment, History Research Video Presentation. Samuel Morse is mostly known today for creating the first modern method of communication. Samuel Morse was an American painter and inventor who is best remembered for his invention, the telegraph, and Morse code, which transmitted information in series of on and off tones, or dots and dashes. The invention of the telegraph revolutionized how people would communicate miles apart. The invention blurred the lines of long-distance communication in the United States and other continents. His discovery changed the way messages were sent and received in the entire world, and even today, Morse code is still used in various areas of communication. Although he was considered poor during the majority of his life, he managed to live as an accomplished painter until he focused his interest on electromagnetism and electronic communication. Samuel Morse was born on April 27, 1791, and died April 2nd, 1872. He was born in the city of Charleston in the state of Massachusetts. Samuel's family would refer to him by the name of Finley. But before we go further into Samuel's inventions, we must first take a look at his early life. His family, his acquaintances, and several of his friends influenced and shaped his life, career, and his character. We will also observe his love of painting, especially portraits. More than anything else, the love of art, the love of painting is what shaped the life of Samuel Morse. He was named after his maternal great-grandfather, Samuel Finley, who was a president of the Princeton College and a distinguished Presbyterian. Samuel's mother was Elizabeth Ann Finley Breese Morse, who was outspoken, educated, and intelligent. She was born September 29, 1766, in the state of Massachusetts. Elizabeth gave birth to 11 children, but only 3 of the 11 survived. She gave birth to Samuel's younger brother, Sidney, who was born in 1779 and was an inventor and author. The youngest sibling was Richard, born 1781. Not much is known on Richard. Samuel's father was Reverend Jedediah Morse. Little after his marriage to Elizabeth, he became the first Congregational Church of Charleston, Massachusetts, the first pastor. Reverend Jedediah was tall and slender. He was described as having a long nose and thick eyebrows. He was also respected and well-spoken. His words and voice would capture people's attention. Like Samuel's mother, the Reverend was highly educated. He graduated from Yale University and was a tutor for some time. He received his undergraduate degree in theology under Dr. Jonathan Edwards, a theologist and philosopher. Jedediah Morse, or the Reverend Morse, was also called the father of American geography. He published many school books. Daniel Webster once spoke of him as, quote, always thinking, always writing, always talking, always acting, end quote. The Reverend, his office or his study was always filled with paper, books, and he was always working. According to the American Philosophical Society, he is recognized as the father of American geography. His textbooks influenced American educational system by creating a sense of American nationalism and American identity. Samuel's education. Samuel was just a young boy when his school teacher, Madame Rand, yells at him, "What are you doing, boy?" Samuel looked up at his ever-livid teacher and tells her with slight fear in his voice, "I was just drawing." The problem was that he was drawing with a pen on a wooden surface. His drawing became a permanent etching of his teacher's face. This would not be the only time the drawings were etched on the wooden desks. Samuel looked down at the etching. The drawing bore a close resemblance of his teacher. The incident was not unnoted to his father. Samuel made his way home knowing that his teacher was right behind him. His father ordered that he stopped his nonsense, but Samuel could not understand why everyone was so upset. His father sent Samuel that evening without supper. Samuel was about to turn 8 years old when his father told him he was no longer going to attend the local school. Samuel was immediately going to attend Phillips Preparatory Academy as his formal education. Samuel's parents saw potential in his academic capacities. Samuel expressed his concerns, but he knew it was pointless to try to change his father's mind. This was going to be the first time Samuel was away from home. After settling at the academy, he came across a few older boys. Samuel had always had a hard time making friends. The boys were older and began to tease him. Samuel, who is smaller in frame and younger than the other boys. One of the boys made a remark about his hands being soft and delicate. The other boys laughed, and Samuel replied by saying, "I'm an artist." Samuel tried to keep to himself and carried on with his drawings, but the boys continued to laugh at him, louder and louder, and tease him. Samuel unfolded his paper and told the boys that he could draw anything and offered to draw one of the boys. Samuel began to draw, nervously, but confident in his artistic abilities. The boys were counting down the minutes. Samuel drew faster, and the boys were staring at him, and the room was completely silent. He could hear his heartbeat. The drawing was done, and Samuel raised the paper to show the boys. The boys were astonished by what they saw. A boy said, "I can't believe it." Another one said, "What are you, another Leonardo?" From this point on, the boys that teased him and called them delicate hands became his friends. He gained respect among the boys, but most importantly, he knew how to make friends. He used his artistic skills. Samuel returned home after completing his studies at the academy. His father, the Reverend Jeremiah, revealed to Samuel that he would continue his studies in religious philosophy, mathematics, and science. Samuel's dream to become an artist was becoming just that, a dream. But his desire would never fade. His father did not approve of Samuel becoming an artist or to study art. Samuel was told by his father that he would be attending Yale College. Samuel was 14 years old when he entered the university in 1805. Again, like when he entered Phillips Academy, Samuel was very nervous. Nevertheless, he was able to make friends once they found out he could draw. Samuel would tell his classmates, "If you sit for me, I will paint your likeness for $1. Samuel made money by painting while he attended college, which allowed him to pay for school and other expenses. Samuel attended lectures by Professor Silliman, who lectured on electricity. Samuel became interested in galvanism and natural science, natural philosophy and chemistry. Professor Silliman would later appear back in his life. Around spring, Samuel attended Yale College. Around spring, Samuel's attendance at Yale College was coming to an end, and his father already had plans for Samuel after his graduation. Prior to his commencement ceremony, the Reverend sent a letter to Samuel letting him know that he had plans for him. Samuel's desire to become an artist continued to seem harder to obtain. Samuel accepted his father's plan. Samuel was going to work for a bookshop in Boston as an apprentice. There he was going to learn about running a business. However, Samuel was bored and uninterested because his aspiration lay in painting. Samuel continued with his routine and apprenticeship in the bookstore until he accidentally bumped into Washington Alston. Both gentlemen were surprised to bump into each other. Aston was surprised that Samuel was working at a bookstore and asked him if he was still painting, to which he replied that his father had organized the apprenticeship and that he painted in the evenings in a small home studio. Samuel had adopted his kitchen area into an art studio. Alston had studied in Paris, Rome, and London under Benjamin West, who resided in England and is a notable 18th century historical religious subject matter painter and portraiture artist. He painted over 600 paintings. He was also the president of Royal Academy. Alston was also a prominent artist who made the name for himself in Europe, where he studied at the Royal Academy in London. He also painted historical scenes and landscapes. Alston offered Samuel to go with him to London the following year, where he would introduce and study under Benjamin West. Samuel nervously told his father his plans. The Reverend replied by saying, "Your mom and I have decided that next summer you will go to London and study with Mr. Alston." Alston took Samuel under his wing and taught him how to stretch canvas, how to properly set up his easel and canvas, and how to mix the linseed oil and pigments that came from flaxseed. Alston explained to Samuel that soon he will have the opportunity to see great works of art from Europe once they sailed to London, which would be on July 13, 1811, taking 21 days to reach London. Before their voyage, Samuel painted on large canvases of historical scenes. Samuel's father agreed to finance him for 3 years as his son studied with a master in England, Benjamin West. Samuel and Alston and his wife Ann traveled to London and arrived on August 15, 1811. There Samuel studied under Benjamin West and the British Institute. West advised Samuel that the assignments would be difficult and his schedule would be aggressive. Samuel wrote to his parents, "My passion for art is firmly rooted, that I am confident no human power could destroy it." Samuel would spend hours a day working on mastering his skill and at the Institute. West told Samuel, "It is not the numberless drawings, but the character of one, which makes a true draftsman. Finish one picture, sir, and you are a painter." Samuel was very pleased by Samuel's determination after he kept telling Samuel that he needed to go and finish it. After long hours of hard work, and to the point where Samuel's fingers would ache, Samuel presented his work to the Academy and was admitted to the Royal Academy in London. In his duration in Europe, he would be commissioned for paintings, but work became less, and many were unemployed due to the war. He focused his studies Though occasionally he had leisure time with his friends, Samuel continued to submit paintings to the Royal Academy, and it wasn't until May 13, 1813, that his painting, Dying Hercules, was going to be exhibited. His painting, The Dying Hercules, received critical acclaim. He received a gold medal. It was first place, and the newspaper wrote about his excellent work. Samuel began to feel the pressure of political tension at the time. War was declared on England. Britain was deep in the fight with France. Troops invaded Washington, and it became unsafe to travel. But Samuel grew tired. His duration in Europe was about 4 to 5 years, and by May of 1815, he was ready to return back home. Upon his return, he set up his studio in Boston to exhibit his paintings in the hope that he would have commission work. Samuel struggled for commission work until his father's connections provided an opportunity for Samuel to paint President John Adams. Samuel quickly realized the respect people had for his father and the connections he had. It took Samuel several weeks to complete the paintings and submit it. Shortly after, he received a pleasant letter expressing the appalling portrait of former president. Samuel was dismayed by such a letter and expressed his feelings to his father. Samuel ranted and said, quote, Are the people in the country so uneducated that as to believe that art should be corrupted in untruthful manner? Samuel captured the detail of, end quote. Samuel captured the detail he saw from the former president. Samuel believed that art should capture reality and not be corrupted or untruthful. Soon after, Samuel decided to travel to New Hampshire to seek work, and word spread that a portraiture artist was in town. In his travels, he continued to travel, and in his travels, he met prominent individuals. However, Samuel grew tired and was exhausted from commission portraits. He would also receive severe blows to his career. And by 1816, Samuel and his brother Sidney ventured together on a invention, a water pump. Samuel and Sidney worked together to improve the design. By the summertime, they obtained a patent in America and were seeking a patent in Europe. They worked tirelessly to push the invention, and Samuel continued to travel for commission work. The brothers traveled to New Hampshire to their former professor, Silliman, to review their invention. The professor was pleased and showed their invention to Professor L.E. Whitney. Whitney invented the cotton gin. He would recommend the invention. Professor Whitney recommended the invention to be published in the following year in Silliman's Journal of Science. The Morse brothers were delighted but had little success in the invention. Samuel continued to travel. This time he traveled to South Carolina to seek commission work. His uncle, Dr. James Finley, provided accommodations, and Samuel held his convictions to paint what he sees and their likeness. Samuel did well and felt ready to support his future wife. In September 1818, Samuel and Lucretia married. By the end of the year, she would birth 3 of his children, and 2 others died in infancy. In 1822 and early 1823, he was commissioned to paint President James Monroe's portrait and about 60 other portraits of other congressional men at the time. Around 1820, 1821, Samuel and Lucretia moved to Samuel's hometown. His parents were getting old and they needed to be taken care of. And he needed to find a better way to support his family. He asked his Professor Solomon for work and informed him of his interest in electricity and galvanism. Samuel helped his professor by preparing experiments. They both traveled together, tested experiments, collected samples, and documenting. Later, they would return back home to Charleston, and Samuel would continue to seek commission work in order to support his family. Much of his work, his commission work, was unsuccessful, and continued to find other means to take care of his family. In 1822, as a means to support his family, Samuel improved the marble cutting machine and the patent to improve the patent. However, the patent was already in existence. At this time, Samuel's son was born in March 1781, Charles Walker Morris. Samuel continued to paint portraits such as neighbor Noah Webster. Samuel soon after traveled to New York and associated himself with New York's elite and influential people who believed could help. Samuel believed that surrounding himself with the elite from New York and have his name mentioned would guarantee some success. James Fenimore Cooper welcomed Samuel as a club member. Of various important figures were part of this club, such as Thomas Cole, William Dumplin, Asher B. Berman, and Henry Ingham, to name a few. In the summer of 1824, Eli Whitney, who was the inventor of the cotton gin, posed for Morris. Whitney asked Morris about his recent inventions, to which he replied that he saw a patent for the marble cutting machine, but nothing came about due to infringement reasons. Mr. Whitney advised Morris the following, quote, "You must pursue with passion equal to the invention, but you must also protect the patent, for there are many deceitful beings in the world that will steal your idea and therefore your livelihood," end quote. Samuel was surprised by his words. Whitney continued to explain that everyone can seek a patent of an existing invention as long as they make changes. Therefore, the patent is important how it's requested. In 1825, Samuel and his family settled in New York. However, they would stay in New Hampshire while Samuel continued painting portraits of important figures such as General Lafayette, and met important politicians at the time in New York and various cities. He received letters. During this time, Samuel received a letter from his father in 1825, which stated that Lucretia, his wife, unexpectedly died from a heart attack at the age of 25. Samuel occupied his mind as he mourned his wife. Samuel and other associated artists from the club he was associated with established the National Academy of Art and Design in New York. Samuel was appointed president and helped the formation of the National Academy of Art and Design. Samuel decided to devote his time on lectures on American artists distinguished. Samuel decided to devote his time to lectures on how American artists are distinguished from the Europeans. Samuel's educational philosophy was that humanity desires to create, not being God. However, it cannot create without nothing. The artist can only combine into two forms of existence of God-given principle of nature, such as motion, order, unity, and mystery. His philosophical foundation is based on how the practical art affects the fine arts and how the principles of nature relate to art. In summer of 1826, Samuel continued his commissioned portraits and came across the post of Professor James Freeman Dana was given a lecture on electromagnetism. Samuel was interested and attended several of his lectures. The professor and Samuel would work together before his passing. Samuel planned another trip to Europe to further his studies in art and continued to write for the Journal of Commerce and the Observer. By late September 1832, he was granted funds for his expedition to Europe. While he traveled, he encountered several gentlemen that were discussing electromagnetism. It was at this point where Samuel's vision on electromagnetism, or the use of electromagnetism, came to his life. Samuel documented his ideas on how intelligence could be transmitted over wire, which he thought a code must be developed. As Samuel sailed back home to America, he continued to develop his experimenting and writing a code that can translate into vocabulary. Samuel's telegraph code or vocabulary would eventually become a proprietary language for whose telegraph eventually known as Morse code. When Samuel was at home, he reached out to his brothers Sidney and Richard. His brothers was supportive and offered him a place for accommodations, and so he continued with his invention. During the time, Samuel became the first professor of painting and sculpture at New York University. The university gave Samuel residency, where he would continue his studies in art and science. In the fall of 1835, he was a prominent professor. He was promoted to professor of literature, of art and design, and he would now receive a salary. Samuel continued to show and by January 1836, Samuel continued working, experimenting on his device, the telegraph. However, Samuel had little money to improve the invention. Samuel continued to work with other professors and make improvements. He would eventually present his device to Professor Gala, who was a professor of chemistry and mineralogy at the time. Professor advised Samuel to increase his battery power, and by January 24, 1836, Samuel exhibited his invention of the telegraph. After much success and improvement, Samuel requested government funding, which would eventually be granted. Samuel invested with others such as Professor Gala, Alfred Balla, and Mr. Smith, which they all had shares to Samuel's invention. By May 16, 1838, Samuel sought a patent in Europe, which they denied and refused the patent, since the invention had already been published in London. It is believed that the article might have copied Silliman's Journal of Science, which published in October 1837. However, in Paris, he gained the patent, and overall was unsuccessful in Europe. By 1840, the patent office gave Samuel the patent, but had fought for the patent for many years. By 1851, Morse telegraph was adopted as a standard in all Europe countries except London or the UK. Morris spent most of his later years fighting for this patent in courts for the rights of official recognition. During his life, Morris received substantial amount of honors, recognition, and awards for for many countries and around the world. Samuel died of pneumonia in his home in New York on April 2nd, 1872, while being married to his second wife, Sarah Elizabeth Morse.